And the school bus would pass us and call us all kind of names. You ended the N-word. You brass ankles and all that. Boy, that hurt. That hurt.
You might see names like Driggers, Sweat, or Chavis in official ledgers, but these communities are living proof that American identity has never been binary. It has always been a mixture of roads and rivers crossing. And nowhere is this more evident than in the history of the mixed race community of the Brass Ankles. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And today we're going to talk about a group called the Brass Ankles. And when you're thinking about American identity, the Brass Ankles are like kind of a subset. And I want to tell their story because I was on the Library of Congress website. I'll put a video up there so you can see. Basically, it's a giant online archive. You're allowed to just go on there, look at all these primary sources that have been scanned. There's movies, there's audio interviews. I mean, going back to like the 30s, amazing, amazing things. And there was a set of photographs of people and they were listed as brass ankles. And so I was really curious and I went down this rabbit hole. And so I'm going to tell you what I found. Before we get into the heart of the story, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the term brass ankle. It is a label with a complicated and sometimes very painful history. It stood out to me and I realized how loaded it was. It was sometimes used as a slur, but also sometimes used within the communities themselves. In an interview I share in this video with Miss Martha Varner, who lived through this history, she made it clear she didn't like the term, and I understand why. But I also found evidence of other people who embraced it as part of their identity. So I'm using it in this video not to offend or label anyone, but to explore the history behind it, the stories buried under that phrase, and what we can still learn from it today. The history of racial identity is far more complex than the black and white terms we like to use, and nowhere is this more evident than in the history of the mixed race community of the Brass Ankles. Emerging in South Carolina, the Brass Ankles were descendants of European settlers, African enslaved individuals, and Native Americans, and their name, Brass Ankles, was believed to refer to their mixed heritage, and in particular, the lighter skin tone that marked them as different. In 1938, there was a government report that I found. So this is a primary source, and it was from Etowah Island, and this is what it said, quote, "The blood of the Indian, the Negro, and the Caucasian flows in the veins of the Brass Ankles. In a physical sense, the Indian strain is perhaps the strongest, but they have many of the characteristics of the Negroes, of whom many of them associate." And this was, the author was Murray, the Etowah Island Report, 1938. I'll leave a link to it below for you. And there is another primary source that I found. It was called the Mother Heart Life Oral History Project. It's from 1939. And so it's another primary source. I'll link to it below. And you can see how deeply this term brass ankle was embedded in the local identity. Although the small grandson attends the white school, Mrs. Cattle is thought to have Indian blood in her veins and is often spoken of in the community as a brass ankle. So there again, 1930s, this term is still being used. Photographs from the early 20th century show humble cabins with mud chimneys, homes where identity was both shielded and preserved. The captions from the Library of Congress chillingly reinforce how these families were seen: Indian, mixed breed, brass ankle. Family near Summerville, South Carolina. Now push forward to the 1930s and 40s. The Great Depression is crushing the economy. World War II is redefining the home front, and the census stops using the term mulatto, forcing people back into checking black or white. But despite the official attempts to categorize these people, these families carved out lives on the edges of society. Martha Varner attended the Pineview School and the Varner Indian School during the 1930s and 1940s. She recalls as a child being called a, quote, brass ankle and the N-word by other children who passed by on school buses. And she's very grateful at this point that South Carolina have finally made the effort to recognize the Native Americans in that state.
Lived through that era that they call the civil rights. During that era, you were unable to go to dominant culture schools. So where did you go to school?
Well, I went to Pineview, the first school I went to. And then from there to the Warner School over here in the Warnertown community. I went there. So that was the only two schools that I went.
Now, you went to those two schools. Were those both Indian schools?
Yes, they were.
So your whole class was Indian?
Right.
Did you know all the kids in the schools that you went to?
Yes, I did. I know. Yes.
Were they related to you?
Yes, most of them were. Yes.
So most of the people in the schools that you went to were kinfolk to you, and
Right. That's right.
As the Wassamasa's tribe records say, Wassamasa. I don't know if I said that right. Let me know. Quote, "We never stopped being who we were, even when the world around us refused to see us." So what does it mean to live in between worlds? Well, in the Deep South, certain communities like the Brass Ankles of South Carolina existed on these edges of the black and white racial divide. So like I said, even the Library of Congress photos uses this terminology, brass ankles, which I thought was so interesting because sometimes when we hear these terms, it's actually things that have changed kind of over time and it wasn't really used by these individuals or used at them. And at least in this case, we know that it was happening at that time. Now, the South, when we think of it, certain images come to mind, especially for a New Yorker like me. I've been living in the South for about 16 years now, but even now, when I think about the South, I picture magnolias, plantations, the Civil War. But what if I told you that much of what we associate with the South is only one version of a much more complex story, a much more American story? What if the South's true identity is less about the associations that we've come to create and more about its constant transformation? The South has actually long been a place of flux, of change, where regional identity and race and culture collide in fascinating and sometimes unexpected ways. This is where the brass ankles come in. Sometimes they were called the Croatan, sometimes mulatto, but always living in this hazy zone between African, Native, European ancestry, and they found refuge in the swampy lowlands of Goose Creek or Holly Hill, away from suspicious stares and the relentless Jim Crow laws. And much like the other triracial groups, such as Melungeons and Redbones, which we've talked about a lot on this channel, the Brass Ankles inhabited a social gray area. They were subjected to shifting laws and the social norms that try to categorize them, but never fully succeeded. And so photographs in the Library of Congress show families listed as Indian, and then in parentheses, it literally says mixed breed brass ankle. Like, we're talking about people, but that's how they were being talked about. And these images don't just capture homes and landscapes, but the reality of living on society's fringes. You might see names like Driggers, Sweat, or Chavis in official ledgers, which, just as a side, I have the last name Chavis directly in my family tree, and these last names tie into the Redbone communities, the Melungeon communities, the Creole communities. We're all family. Now, living between two worlds comes with unique struggles. Groups like the Brass Ankles had to navigate an America that was both transforming and still holding on to old prejudices. And while some tried to pass as white, others clung to their mixed heritage, forming tight-knit communities that were often misunderstood. And why does it matter today? Well, the story of the Brass Ankles has more to do with our present than we might think. Every time you choose to check a box on a form, this echoes the Brass Ankles dilemma. What if you are bigger than the categories forced upon you? As historian George Tyndall suggests in his study that's called Beyond the Mainstream, the Ethnic Southerners, the South has had this long-held myth of being homogenous, this idea that there weren't nuances and different ethnic things happening there. But that's not true. And the Brass Ankles represent one of these marginalized ethnic identities, a group that didn't quite fit in. What we consider the South maybe has changed in some ways, but I think the South's influence on the American story remains as powerful as ever. I think by understanding Southern history and its fight to retain identity while becoming part of something else, we gain a clearer picture of the American experience. But these communities are living proof that American identity has never been binary. It has always been a mixture of roads and rivers crossing. If you'd like to check out some of the primary sources I shared in here, I'd love to have you do that. If you'd like to join me off YouTube and hang out on Patreon, that would be awesome at patreon.com/NYTN. Otherwise, we'll talk soon.
Over the last 2 years, I've been telling the stories that often get ignored. But lately, I've been facing an uphill battle behind the scenes of each video. My videos are getting flagged by YouTube when all I'm doing is sharing real history. If these stories have ever resonated with you or given you a new perspective, grab some Be a Good Ancestor merch and help me keep this channel going. Check out nytonashville.com.